Welcome to US Daily News Channel. The Russian army seems to have completely stopped its advance in Ukraine. With the resistance of the Ukrainian armed forces, the ground operation of the Russian army was completely stopped. The Ukrainian army, special operations teams and volunteer joint forces launched a major offensive operation against Russia 1 week ago. As a result, Ukraine liberated at least 15 areas and repulsed Russian troops there. Ukraine won one of its greatest victories by rescuing Trostianets, and made Russia pay a huge price. It was stated that the offensive by the Ukrainian armed forces was the greatest success so far and one of Russia's greatest losses. In this legendary success of the Ukrainian army, in Trostianets, the elite Kantemirovskaya division from the 1st Guards Tank Army of the Western Military District of Russia was defeated by the armed forces of Ukraine. After the defeat at Trostianets, the commander of the 13th Tank Regiment, which was part of the Kantemirovskaya division, shot himself in the Sumy region. Also, the commander of the 1st Guards Tank Army of the Western Military District of Russia was dismissed. In all its striking details, we will examine the details of Russia's greatest defeat against the Ukrainian army and Ukraine's Aerorozvidka Special Air Reconnaissance Battalion shortly. The statements of the Russian Deputy Chief of Staff last week were interpreted as an admission of Russia's failure. In general, the main tasks of the first stage of the operation have been completed, Colonel General Sergei Rudskoy, the first Deputy Chief of the General Staff of Russia, told a briefing on Friday. The combat potential of the Ukrainian armed forces has significantly decreased, which allows us, I emphasize again, to focus the main effort on achieving the main goal, the liberation of the Donbass. Said. In fact, this was an admission of the failure of Russia's Plan A. From this statement of Russia, it is seen that Russia's advances have stopped around major Ukrainian cities such as Kyiv and Kharkiv. Russia also failed to gain air superiority over Ukraine and has suffered heavy personnel losses since the invasion began. In addition, it is understood that the first month of the Ukrainian occupation, where Russia's fuel and food stocks were depleted, was unsuccessful. As large explosions were reported in Kiev earlier on Monday, the Ukrainian military said Russian forces were attempting to seize highways and key towns east and northwest of the capital. The attacks came as Ukrainian officials warned that Russia could shift its focus to securing control of eastern Ukraine, potentially dividing the country between areas it controls and does not control. A Ukrainian counterattack appeared to be making gains in parts of the northeast, as officials claimed Russian forces had been pushed out of several towns, including Trostianets, 30 miles from the besieged provincial capital of Sumy. In Trostianets, Russia's elite division was defeated by the Ukrainian armed forces. After the defeat at Trostianets, the Sumy district, the commander of the 13th Tank Regiment, which was part of the Kantemirovskaya division, shot himself. The commander of the 1st Guards Tank Army of the Western Military District was dismissed. Information came from the Intelligence Chief Directorate that on the evening of March 26, the commander of the 13th Tank Regiment, part of Russia's Kantemirovskaya division, shot himself, said the ground forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In addition, the commander of the 1st Guards Tank Army of the Western Military District, which included the notorious elite Kantemirovskaya division, Lieutenant General Sergei Kissel, was dismissed. It was noted that Kissel was dismissed due to heavy losses and the failure of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We do not ignore the fact that the escape of the Russian army from Trostianets was the last straw. At that time it was impossible for the Russian leadership to turn a blind eye to the mismanagement of the troops, the Ukrainian armed forces said. Earlier, it was reported that the 200th Separate Motor Infantry Brigade of the Russian Federation lost 648 soldiers fighting against Ukraine. In addition, detachments of the armed forces of Ukraine control the train station of the city. Meanwhile, former Sumy Mayor Gennady Minaev said that according to him, the Russians began withdrawing their troops south of the regional center 3 days ago. A group of Russian troops besieging Sumy from the south withdrew all of more than 250 artillery and armored vehicles and more than 200 cars and other equipment. It is seen that a special IT battalion has a great impact on this success of Ukraine. Aerorozvidka Special Air Reconnaissance Battalion played a key role in the defense of such large cities as Mariupol, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa and Sumy. Special IT force of 30 soldiers on quad bikes is vital part of Ukraine's defense, but forced to crowdfund for supplies. 1 week into its invasion of Ukraine, Russia massed a 40-mile mechanized column in order to mount an overwhelming attack on Kyiv from the north. But the convoy of armored vehicles and supply trucks ground to a halt within days, and the offensive failed, in significant part because of a series of night ambushes carried out by a team of 30 Ukrainian special forces and drone operators on quad bikes, according to a Ukrainian commander. The drone operators were drawn from an air reconnaissance unit, Aerorozvidka, which began 8 years ago as a group of volunteer IT specialists and hobbyists designing their own machines and has evolved into an essential element in Ukraine's successful David and Goliath resistance. However, while Ukraine's Western backers have supplied thousands of anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles and other military equipment, Aerorozvidka has been forced to resort to crowdfunding in a network of personal contacts in order to keep going, by getting hold of components such as advanced modems and thermal imaging cameras, in the face of export controls that prohibit them being sent to Ukraine. The unit's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Yaroslav Honchr, gave an account of the ambush near the town of Ivanki that helped stop the vast, lumbering Russian offensive in its tracks. He said the Ukrainian fighters on quad bikes were able to approach the advancing Russian column at night by riding through the forest on either side of the road leading south towards Kyiv from the direction of Chernobyl. The Ukrainian soldiers were equipped with night vision goggles, sniper rifles, remotely detonated mines, drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras and others capable of dropping small 1.5 kilograms bombs. This one little unit in the night destroyed 2 or 3 vehicles at the head of this convoy, and after that it was stuck. They stayed there 2 more nights, and destroyed many vehicles, Honchr said. The Russians broke the column into smaller units to try to make headway towards the Ukrainian capital, but the same assault team was able to mount an attack on its supply depot, he claimed, crippling the Russians' capacity to advance. The first echelon of the Russian force was stuck without heat, without oil, without bombs and without gas. And it all happened because of the work of 30 people, Honchr said. The Aerorozvidka unit also claims to have helped defeat a Russian airborne attack on Hostomel Airport, just northwest of Kyiv, in the first day of the war, using drones to locate, target and shell about 200 Russian paratroopers concealed at one end of the airfield. That contributed largely to the fact that they could not use this airfield for further development of their attack, sighed Lieutenant Taras, one of Honchr's aides. Not all the details of these claims could be independently verified, but U.S. defense officials have said that Ukrainian attacks contributed to the halting of the armored column around Ivanki. The huge amount of aerial combat footage published by the Ukrainians underlines the importance of drones to their resistance. The unit was started by young university-educated Ukrainians who had been part of the 2014 Maidan Uprising and volunteered to use their technical skills in the resistance against the first Russian invasion in Crimea and the Donbass region. Its founder, Volodymyr Kochetkov-Sukach, was an investment banker who was killed in action in 2015 in Donbass, a reminder of the high risks involved. The Russians can latch on to the drone's electronic signature and quickly strike with mortars, so the Aerorozvidka teams have to launch and run. Honchr is an ex-soldier turned IT marketing consultant, who returned to the army after the first Russian invasion. Taras, who asked not to use his surname, was a management consultant, who specialized in fundraising for the unit and only joined full-time as a combatant in February. In its early days, the unit used commercial surveillance drones, but its team of engineers, software designers and drone enthusiasts later developed their own designs. It now uses the Starlink satellite system, supplied by Elon Musk, to feed live data to Ukrainian artillery units, allowing them to zero in on Russian targets. The unit was disbanded in 2019 by the then defense minister, but it was hastily revived in October last year as the Russian invasion threat loomed. The ability to maintain an aerial view of Russian movements has been critical to the success of Ukraine's guerrilla-style tactics.
But Aerorozvidka's efforts to expand, and to replace lost equipment, have been hindered by a limited supply of drones and components, and efforts to secure them through Defense Ministry procurement have produced little, partly because they are a recent addition to the armed forces and still considered outsiders.
Furthermore, some of the advanced modems and thermal imaging cameras made in the US and Canada are subject to export controls, so they have resorted to crowdfunding and asking a global network of friends and supporters to find them on eBay or other websites. The unit is also looking at ways to overcome Russian jamming, part of the electronic warfare being waged in Ukraine in parallel to the bombs, shells and missiles. At present, Aerorozvidka typically waits for the Russians turn off their jamming equipment to launch their own drones, and then it sends up its machines at the same time. The unit then concentrates its firepower on the electronic warfare vehicles. Honchar describes these technological battles, and Aerorozvidka's way of fighting, as the future of warfare, in which swarms of small teams networked together by mutual trust and advanced communications can overwhelm a bigger and more heavily armed adversary. "We are like a hive of bees," he said. "One bee is nothing, but if you are faced with 1,000, it can defeat a big force. We are like bees, but we work at night.